The 7-step moral reasoning model. The 7-step moral reasoning model was developed by the American theologian and Christian ethics professor Scott Ray in order to help people make better decisions in moral dilemmas. Originally proposed in his 1995 book, Moral Choices: An Introduction to Ethics, the model was designed not so much to get people to the right answer, but to help them ask the right questions in their ethical deliberation. Although the model is consistent with the Bible and uses biblical principles, it is not, however, a distinctly Christian model. Rather, it is impartial, free from cultural, ethnic, and religious biases. Moreover, the model is oriented primarily towards moral values and principles, with consideration of consequences as a supporting role. This is because many moral issues, especially in medical cases like abortion, are not addressed clearly, if at all, in the Bible. Hence, it would be dangerous to oversimplify them by providing general biblical solutions. The best way to approach them, therefore, would be to use a model that is based on moral values and principles. Step 1. Gather the facts. According to Ray, the first step in addressing moral dilemmas is to get things into a more objective perspective. This is done by gathering all the dilemma's relevant facts and making sure that they're clear. Do you have all the necessary facts to make a good decision? What do you know about the dilemma? What do you need to know or know more about? This step is very crucial. It tells you whether you're really facing a moral dilemma or just some problem about perspective, communication, approach, etc. Step 2. Determine the ethical issues. Moral dilemmas always have tension in them. This tension is caused by the competing interests of the people involved. These interests, in turn, are supported by the moral values and principles these people hold. Step 2 is to identify the competing interests in the dilemma and its underlying moral values and principles. Take note that if you can't identify any values or principles that support these interests, then you are most likely not dealing with a real moral dilemma. Step 3. Determine what values or principles have a bearing on the case. As mentioned earlier, moral dilemmas have certain values and principles that are central to the competing positions of the people involved. They are actually the reason why these people hold their positions strongly and with passion. Step 3 is to determine what these moral values and principles are. Find out if some of these should be given more weight than others, and ask what the source of that value or principle is. Is it from your society's constitution or culture, or is it from the natural law, or from your religious tradition? These moral values and principles supplement biblical principles. Step 4. List the alternatives. Step 4 is to determine all the possible actions you can take for the dilemma. Notice that some of these actions will almost immediately be discarded, while others will remain and challenge the rest. Generally, the more alternatives you list, the greater the possibility of coming up with a really good one. Not to mention, doing this will expand the choice of actions you can take. Step 5. Compare the alternatives with the values or principles. Step 5 tests your remaining alternatives by weighing them against the moral values and principles involved in the dilemma. If an alternative fails to satisfy these values and principles, then you will have to eliminate it from your possible courses of action. Take note that you may have to weigh the values and principles themselves against each other in order to arrive at the best available alternative. Ideally, this step should leave you with only the best course of action for the dilemma and disregard the need to continue with steps 6 and 7. But in case the dilemma hasn't been resolved yet, here's step 6. Consider the consequences. If the dilemma's values and principles have still not given you a clear course of action to take, then consider the possible consequences of your remaining alternatives. This means working out each of their positive and negative consequences and estimating how beneficial or harmful they are to the dilemma if you were to choose them. And finally, step 7. Make a decision. In the end, you have to decide which course of action you think is best for the dilemma. Be careful with analysis paralysis. Remember that moral decisions, especially in dilemmas, are rarely pain-free solutions. In most cases, your best alternative may be the one which has the least problems or negative consequences. Keep in mind that even when making the best decision, you might still end up losing sleep over it. To recap, here are the 7 steps of Ray's moral reasoning model. Step 1. Gather the facts. Step 2. Determine the ethical issues. Step 3. Determine what values or principles have a bearing on the case. Step 4. List the alternatives. Step 5. Compare the alternatives with the values or principles. Step 6. Consider the consequences. And Step 7. Make a decision. Before we end this video, try applying the 7-step model to our moral case studies and see how more systematic you are at making moral decisions. You can find them in our ethics playlist, linked in the description below. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next video.